Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules to join our latest virtual breakfast briefing, held this morning in partnership with Thales, long-standing and hugely important partner to Mobliciti. And today's briefing is going to be focused around controlling the keys to the kingdom. So we are really excited to share with you today some of our thoughts around cloud key management and ultimately looking to keep enterprise cloud resources safe and secure. So hopefully you'll find it an insightful hour or so, and I'm sure you will. So thank you again for joining, and hopefully everyone's received their breakfast hampers as well. I think they should have arrived yesterday. So if there's anything left of those, if family haven't destroyed them already, please do tuck in throughout the next hour or so and enjoy. So good stuff. And final point, Q&A. We really do, I'm hopeful there's going to be lots of questions and queries that will come out throughout this morning's presentation. So please, any questions you do have, you see at the bottom bar, there is a Q&A section. Please do pop them in there. And towards the end of today's session, I'll make sure those questions get picked up and fielded to the appropriate people. Good stuff. All right, so let's move on to this morning's agenda. So we'll quickly open things up with a brief introduction. Andy Brown is going to talk a little bit around the cloud tipping point and what we're seeing in terms of the dramatic shift towards more and more cloud, and particularly how events over the past year or so have helped to accelerate that pace of change. And then we're going to pass over to the Thales team. We're going to be covering a number of points this morning, but looking at some of the challenges around data sovereignty, how to control crypto in the cloud, importantly for today, an introduction to cloud key management, and ultimately how this is all helping to keep your enterprise cloud resources safe and secure. And absolutely delighted that we have a customer joining us today to share some of their experiences. We have global law firm Bird & Bird. We're going to be talking a little bit more on their journey to embracing a multi-cloud key manager. So delighted to have Bird & Bird with us today. So if we go on to today's presenters, we've got a few different voices that you'll get to hear throughout the morning. See myself, Ashley Dell, head of the sales team here at Mobliciti, and also from Mobliciti, Andy Brown, our CTO. We've got Chris Taylor, regional sales manager responsible for the professional services market over at Thales. His colleague Pete Smith, senior sales engineer, and as I say, delighted that we have Martin Stiles, head of information security at Bird & Bird, who's going to be sharing some of his own insights from what Bird & Bird have done in this space over the past year or so. So Martin, again, thank you so much for taking some time out to join us today. So very quickly, because I think looking at the delegate list for today, many of you will be familiar with Mobliciti, but for those less so, a very quick introduction. So we as a business are focused exclusively around helping our clients against their cloud and mobile IT agendas, and have been ever since our inception over 12 years ago. It's a heavily professional services client base that we support today. So a huge amount of work we're doing in the legal and finance industries, many of which I know are represented on today's call. And really what we do is we do an array of different services and managed services which help our customers to bridge any skills and resource gaps that they have within their teams, but all around trying to help drive mobile and cloud adoption within their organizations. And clearly the latter of those two is intrinsically linked to this morning's briefing and what we're going to be talking about. So yeah, in summary, we help our customers transition to cloud, work effectively and securely across all endpoints. And that's regardless if you're in the office or at home. And we do all of that whilst trying to help our clients better manage their IT spend. So there's a lot more detail to that, but not what we're here to cover today. So hopefully the 1,000-mile-high view to help position Mobliciti. So really now I'd love to get into the meat of this morning's briefing, and at which point I'm going to hand over to Andy Brown.
Thanks, Ash. And yeah, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to start by kind of talking about where we're at in the market, what we're seeing out there in terms of what I'm calling the cloud tipping point now. As with any tipping point, it's been a sense of momentum building and passing over a threshold, and it definitely feels like that's where we're at now. In terms of a kind of state of the nation, what we're often seeing is that for many enterprises now, the introduction of cloud services is very much a kind of what I would call a hybrid state right now in terms of footprint. So there's still on-premise infrastructure, still running your own data center services, very much a trajectory now has been, though, that we're seeing cloud services being adopted alongside it and workloads increasingly transitioning across into cloud services. What we've seen over a period of time and the kind of the growth of cloud has been around looking at the footprint, I suppose. It's grown reasonably organically. So we've had kind of, specific projects have come along and people have dipped their toe into the water of cloud services over time. There's been a lot of point solutions traditionally deployed kind of to start the process off. So, many organizations will have a little bit of AWS, a little bit of Azure, maybe even, a bit of Google Cloud, whatever it may be. And actually, one of the things, if you rewind a little while, one of the points we were making, there's been a lot of debate about, can we put our data into cloud services? And we always kind of have to do the kind of don't talk about Mimecast, which was kind of the cloud before there was a cloud. But definitely, there's now pieces of infrastructure as a service and platform as a service coming into place. There's also an increasing adoption that's happened as a result of COVID, clearly. So as with a lot of things we've seen out there, COVID has really, it's not changed strategy. What it's caused is a dramatic speed up of adoption of services. And some of the really obvious things have been around, things like, tools like we're using today, sort of video collaboration tool sets, be it Zoom or Teams, whatever it may be. Teams as a platform has been very rapidly adopted into a lot of organizations, and a lot of business processes now starting to be re-engineered around it, which is an interesting piece, just simply because Teams is far more than just a chat tool or a video communication tool. It's clearly a complete collaboration platform, including data sharing. But there's also, a really interesting shift going on around the fact that many organizations effectively did away with their private network for a while in terms of, LANs and WANs. They've been running with everybody remote. And that is starting to feed into all kinds of conversations about, where is the perimeter of the network? How are we going to architect things going forwards? And I suppose that kind of leads into what we're starting to see now is kind of things starting to coalesce more into what I call a shift to strategic cloud services. So what are our core platforms and what is our core strategy to consume cloud services going forwards? And what that tends to be a conversation, it kind of starts around, in particular, Office 365. Clearly most organizations are now somewhere on the journey to Office 365. Exchange Online is obviously one of those key tipping points itself, where really quite sensitive grade data is now stored and consumed in a cloud service, SaaS cloud service. But of course, underpinning all of that is the Microsoft Azure platform, and it is a logical extension that you see Azure very often as kind of the foundation stone of cloud strategy for the, if you like, the core infrastructure type services as well. Now, the point we make here is absolutely these services are popular and they are the right services to be using, but it's really important to try and get the foundations right with this. And that's what this webinar is really about today, is for us, it's not just about adopting the cloud service and indeed, transferring data into it, but it's actually making sure you've set the right foundation stones in terms of, right, how is your data protected in that cloud service? How do you protect access to that cloud service? How are you going to control data flows in and out? And all of that leads us to where we're going with this webinar today, which is really around the fundamental of, right, this data is in a cloud service. How do we ensure we are the only people who ultimately can control access to it? And with that, I'm going to hand over to Chris to kind of go through in more detail about why some of the challenges that align to that.
Okay, morning all. So from our side of things, we've seen, as everyone here has, the huge drive to using cloud and a huge push to do this and leverage all those great things about clouds. But as Andy talks about the tipping point, we see the tipping point with particularly professional services law firms and others have come to us because this has opened up a whole new range of challenges around privacy concerns and around maybe their customers, their enterprise customers or end users that are raising privacy concerns with them. What we've seen is they need to try to get to a level where they can get the same sort of security as they've enjoyed on-prem, but leveraging the cloud. But there's huge amounts of confusion. We've got customers coming to us and say, what is BYOK? What is bring your own encryption? And also often worried about loss of control. So we see subpoenas being raised as an issue. We see fears of not having any control if you were to move cloud providers. So what do I do if I'm changing strategy and I'm going to go from Azure to AWS, or the fact that you've got no control of who might be administering this, and in particular the keys and the cryptographic material to it. So those are what people have come to us, and it started off in a small way sort of 3 or 4 years ago, but we've seen a real flurry of inquiries and people coming to us with their hands up. They haven't got crypto architects often, and they're not banks, they're not in the military, and they're coming to us as a market leader to help them demystify that. So this is really why we're here today, to try and start us off on that. Next slide, please. So I talked about subpoenas, and this is something which isn't a theoretical thing. It's very, very real. On the right hand side of the slide here, you can see this is direct from the Microsoft web page, which you can easily Google, and you'll see a frightening amount of requests from US law enforcement to release data and release keys to Microsoft. If Microsoft have those keys, then clearly they'll be in a position where they have to release them, whereby if you have control of those keys yourself as an enterprise, maybe you won't be able to prevent the data being released, but at least you'll have control over it and the jurisdiction it's released in to an extent. And that's very, very powerful and very, very important, not just to you but to your customers. On the left hand side, again, it's not a theoretical thing. Capital One breach was caused in most part by release of key material by I believe a rogue admin over at one of the cloud providers, and there's many examples that we've seen of that. So if you have control of that, you'll be able to prevent those rogue admin instances. So those are, in a nutshell, the challenges. I'll hand over now to Pete, who will talk you through our platforms and how we can address those. Over to you, Pete.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, today we're going to concentrate on how we can achieve everything that's just been put forward. How can you become the key custodian? How can you take ownership of those keys? How can you leverage that and be able to put your data in the cloud and be secure and ensure that you only have access to that data? So before we go into talking about how we do the cloud key management, I'd just like to introduce Talos. Perhaps a lot of you do know who Talos are, but perhaps there are a few that don't understand or know who Talos are. It's pronounced Talos. A lot of people that I talk to in face-to-face, if you remember those days, were unsure how to pronounce the word. Some said Tails, some said Talis, some said Thales, it's Thales. So Thales are a big global organization. We play in a lot of different engineering arenas, of which cybersecurity is just one. You may have recalled when the Mars lander landed on Mars a couple of months ago. Thales were involved in that project. The Thales Space Division was involved in that, and the laser guiding systems on that particular lander were all produced and provided by Thales. Chris and I, we work for part of Thales that are purely focused on cybersecurity, and that's what we're going to kind of concentrate on today. So if you look at the next slide, I can explain exactly where we sit within the Thales organization. As you can see, again, we are part of an entity called Cloud Protection and Licensing. We don't just do data at rest encryption and key management, as you can see with this slide here. We also offer as a service HSMs and data protection on demand. We offer solutions for access management, which again is very relevant to the discussions today, but maybe more focused on multi-factor authentication and access management. If anybody has ever needed to buy something online, then the chances are, if you've gone to an ATM and you need to get cash out, you would have hit one of the PayShield hardware security modules. These are specific to the payments industry, but we're the #1 leader in supplying all the major banks and all the major acquirers this type of cryptography to enable them to ensure that I've got my money in my account and I can pay for the goods that I'm after. When it comes to doing things like PKI or having lots and lots of certificates or lots of sign-in requirements, we have the market-leading Luna general purpose hardware security module. And obviously, a lot of this is between massive data centers, and sometimes you need to protect securely sensitive information in transit. So we also offer high-speed network encryption solutions. These are very, very robust, very highly certified devices, very low latency, give you all the bandwidth up to 100 gigabits a second. But today we're going to be looking at the top left-hand side, the CipherTrust data security platform, and how that can enable you to protect data at rest and data wherever it resides. The CipherTrust Key Manager is part and parcel of a platform. And that platform is centered around the CipherTrust Manager that you can see in the middle here. That comes as either an appliance or as a virtual image that can be deployed, again, ironically, in the cloud. If you want to, you can have Cipher Manager in the cloud, or you can have Cipher Manager on-prem. And if you kind of walk around this clock, as it were, we offer data discovery. A lot of organizations, a lot of enterprises are not sure where their sensitive data actually resides. They do have, obviously, applications that are bringing in data and putting it into a particular application on a particular database, and they know that's happening. But when we run some of these scanners, they're quite taken aback by where some of this data is leaked out, where it's residing. They didn't know it was there. So if you're trying to meet PCI compliance, if you're trying to meet other assurances, this will let you know where that data is. And then you can take remedial action. You can encrypt that data. And going around the clock, we are showing different means by which we can then help you to meet the requirement of encrypting that data. So transparent data encryption, as Chris alluded to in his very early sort of statement, there's bring your own key. There's also bring your own encryption. And the transparent data encryption enables you, if you want to actually encrypt data no matter where it is, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, at the actual server point. Going around, there's a lot of requirements to move data from a sensitive environment into maybe a training environment or a non-prod environment to do testing. That's where we can offer batch data transformation. We can take large amounts of data, transform it so it becomes encrypted, and then put that into another area. It can be used, and the processors would look at it and think it's real data. But if that gets breached, then that data is useless. There's a lot of security around the production environment, not quite so much security around other environments. We can do this at the application level, and CipherTrust Key Manager enables anybody to do key management to databases. We offer the KBIT protocol, so if you've got large storage arrays, then the CipherTrust Manager will allow you to, again, apply key management away from where it's stored and meet the criteria where you can then put keys back into that storage array and encrypt that storage and keep it secure. All of these elements can come together. So if you've got a large data pool, then we can encrypt that data pool. Today, as we said, CipherTrust Cloud Key Manager is what we're looking at. It's part of the platform. It's one element that we'll be discussing today. So let's get on to focusing purely and simply on what is the CipherTrust Cloud Key Manager and how does that enable you to be the key custodian? How does that enable you to remain and keep the sovereignty of your data? And there's lots of options when you start to consider how you're going to utilize leveraging off the cloud. And in the next slide, we'll start to build a picture of who's responsible for what aspect. So if you're moving from being on-prem, if you're moving from a hybrid to being into the cloud, there's only one part of that arrangement that's purely the customer responsibility, and that is always the data. The cloud service providers are not responsible for that data. If that data gets leaked, if that data gets hacked, that's your responsibility, not the cloud service providers. So what options do we have to move our data into the cloud? And of course, we can start off with the very simple one. So, well, look, okay, we want to move our data into the cloud. We don't want to be responsible for having to keep that infrastructure up and running. We want the cloud service provider to do that. So we'll just put our data up into the cloud. We're not concerned about security. The data is not sensitive. So we're just happy to, put all our family images or our company images or our company data. It's not sensitive. We'll just use the cloud to do that. That's fine if you haven't got sensitive data to be worried about. But what happens if you do need to start considering securing that data? So the next kind of option is to say, okay, well, I don't understand much about key management. I don't understand what's required here, but I know the cloud service providers will actually generate a key for me and do that on my behalf. So again, you could say to the cloud service provider, here's my data, please, can you generate a key and can you please encrypt that data? Now, that's a better step forward, but you do not own that key. You're not the key custodian. And as Chris mentioned earlier, if there are a subpoena raised, that subpoena goes to the cloud service provider, not to you. So you don't know how strong that key is. You don't have any control over that key. So it's a good step in the right direction, but perhaps not the best and robust way of making sure you are in complete control of the encryption of that data. And that's just basically with one cloud service provider. Obviously, if we look at the next option, we've got multiple cloud service providers. Again, this is an option. You can enable each of those cloud service providers to generate keys. The downside is each of those keys and the key materials, they're very different. So if you have to learn how to use the facilities of, say, Azure to create, destroy, rotate a key that they've created on your behalf, or you need to do that with AWS, or you need to do that with IBM Cloud, or you need to do that with Google Cloud Platform. Each of those cloud service providers has fundamentally different ways of trying to achieve the same end. So what you find is you don't know how strong the key is, you don't own the key, but you needed to set up separate teams just to be able to be conversant in how to manage those keys using the cloud service providers' management facilities. So the next thing to kind of consider is doing a bring your own key. And this is a good step in the right direction. Now the key material is coming back to you. You're going to be owning the key. So you derive a key, it's a certified entropy of key material, you know it's a strong key. And typically, Talos would offer this. We would say, okay, we have a hardware security module that we saw earlier. That can store a key. You can then wrap that key, send it up into the cloud. But again, you have to then use the cloud key service providers management to manage that key using their facilities. If you do that with multi-cloud, so again, going on to a wider picture, you then have to say, okay, I can create keys. I can push those keys into each of those different cloud service providers. We're back to the scenario where you now need to have expertise for each of those different cloud service providers on how that's going to be consumed and how you're going to delete keys, rotate keys, using the cloud service providers' key management tools. So finally, and where we are kind of trying to bring all this together, make it as smooth and as efficient as is possible, this is where we use the CipherTrust Cloud Key Manager service. This enables you to do everything we just talked about in the sense of bring your own key. So we will derive keys. They are certified to a very high FIPS level. We can store those keys locally on the CipherTrust Cloud Key Manager. We retain a copy of those keys. So those keys can then be pushed into individual clouds. You're now going to use the CipherTrust Cloud Key Manager front end, its user experience, which is universal no matter what cloud service provider you're talking to. So whether you're talking to Azure or whether you're doing key management to AWS, the method in which you would do that presented to you is exactly the same across all of those cloud services. It makes things far more efficient. You no longer have to have multiple teams that are expert in doing whatever cloud service provider requires of them. What you're actually doing is saying, I've got a single front end. If I want to do a key rotation, I'll just click a box. It's the same whether it's Azure, it's the same whether it's AWS, it's the same whether it's Google Cloud. That's what the CipherTrust Cloud Key Manager brings together. So it's a very, very efficient single user interface, enable you to own the key, you own the key, you own the sovereignty, you are the key custodian. Therefore, anything that needs to be given up as a request for a subpoena comes to you. It no longer goes to the cloud service provider. Next slide, please. So just to kind of focus on what we're saying here, yes, there is a bring your own key, a BYOK, but as I say, it requires a high-skilled team to know what to do for each of the different cloud service providers. The kind of bring your own key, it creates a key, but that's as far as it goes. It then gets pushed into the individual cloud service provider. You then have to learn how to do each of those functions particular to each of the different cloud service providers. When we look at the CCKM, the CipherTrust Cloud Key Manager, it's automated. It's the same front end, no matter what you're trying to achieve. It makes things very, very simple, and it makes the key lifetime ownership and the key lifetime management of those keys very, very, very efficient. Next slide, please. So what is CCKM and what cloud services does it support today? At the moment, we're there with the major cloud service providers. So we support Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, IBM Cloud. Obviously, with Azure, we can then offer to enable you to secure your Office 365 and all of the Azure services that go with that. We also enable you to encrypt any Salesforce instances you have. The main part here is, again, we are making it universal. We're adding to this all the time. We have 2 or 3 new cloud service providers to add to this in the next couple of months. You'll hear about that as we go forward. As you can see, it's very universal. It's going to be very simple to give you all of the management tools you need. So the next slide will show us the means by which you can centralize this. You can view keys at the touch of a click of a button. The main kind of thing that you need to take on board is if you were to create a key, or if a key was created on your behalf and destroyed inadvertently, you've got no comeback. With CCKM, because we're keeping a copy of the keys inside our CipherTrust Manager, if someone was to inadvertently destroy a key, then you've got a copy of it. You can push that key back into the cloud and obviously decrypt and access the data again. There's also the rotation of keys. Generally, this would be done manually. With CCKM, you can set up an automatic key rotation on a regular basis. So if your auditors say you have to rotate keys every 6 months or every year, you can set that up as an automated process. Again, similar process no matter what cloud provider you're using. Also, if you've already got information in the cloud, if you've already used the cloud service provider to create keys and you come along and you deploy CCKM, then you can do a key synchronization. CCKM will take a copy of any key material that the cloud has already created, and you can then start to discover. You might find that different teams in your organization have been producing keys unknowing to yourself. CCKM will enable you to synchronize, discover those keys, pull them into the platform, so you now got control over keys that were created before in the separate cloud service providers. So as you can see, there's a lot to what CCKM will do for you. It will enable you to own the key lifecycle management of that key. It will enable you to back up keys. It importantly enables you to create a lot of reporting. So if auditors are requesting lots of types of reports, then CCKM, again, it's the same type of front end, no matter which of the cloud service providers it is, to create typically, you know, a key activity report. Who created the key? When was it rotated? When was it destroyed? When was it deleted? And so on. So you can create a lot of information that can be held inside the organization, a lot of information that can be presented to auditors to show where those keys have been created, where those keys have been rotated, where those keys have been destroyed. And if you do want to move out from one cloud provider to another, you can just say, okay, I'm going to destroy all the keys. I don't then have to worry about whether the cloud service provider can access the actual material, the data itself, because it's encrypted and they do not have access to the keys. Okay, so just to kind of finish, the benefits of CCKM, what we're looking at here is, as we say, it's making things centralized no matter who the cloud service provider is. It allows you to be extremely efficient in doing all the key management, again, independent of the cloud service provider. It allows you to see who created keys, who's destroyed keys, who's rotated keys, and so on. And it enables you to have the separation of who's got the key ownership to who's looking after the data. So you're meeting all the criteria, you're meeting the data sovereignty, you are the key custodian, and it makes it such an ease for any of the different cloud service providers you may be wanting to engage with. Last slide will basically show, as we said at the beginning, we can build the slide out, that the Cipher Trust Manager is a platform, as we said. It enables you to grow. If you start off using Cipher Trust Manager and CCKM, fantastic. That's going to enable you to do what you need to do today. Most companies and most enterprises we actually start to talk to that come to us, we discover they've also got databases in the cloud. They've got databases on-prem. The Cipher Trust Manager, just by adding another license, will enable you to do bring your own encryption, or apply encryption at data at rest, or do key management to databases, or key management to storage. It's not just CCKM. Cipher Trust Manager is a platform that enables you to actually meet the requirement for today, knowing that if you've got other aspects going forward, that the likelihood is Cipher Trust Manager will enable you to meet the security of that as well. But fundamentally today, it's being the key custodian, the key manager, you're owning the key, you are the person who any subpoenas come to, so you have sovereignty over your data. Thank you. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks very much. Morning, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. Cool. Thanks very much, Pete. For those of you that don't know anything about Bird & Bird and myself, I'm Martin Stiles. I'm Head of Information Security at Bird & Bird. We're an international law firm, fairly large. We've got around 3,000 staff, 29 different offices in about 20 countries around the world, most of Europe, Asia Pacific, Sydney, Australia, and the US as well. So we're well spread over the world, including a number of offices in Germany. And I'm sure many of you are aware about the data sovereignty requirements and concerns about access to data in Germany. So they're definitely things that we're interested in. This is the second major law firm that I've implemented a Talos solution in. I implemented a CCKM solution in my previous firm, which was a bigger firm, but about 4 years ago, we implemented the CCKM. It was a much more complicated solution at the time, and I think Talos have really taken that on board and now understand the fact that a lot of companies that are implementing this technology don't have large teams that are dedicated to encryption activities like banks and military, etc. So firms like ourselves needed a more integrated and easier to manage solution. So they compressed down the product from what was effectively 2 hardware boxes for us, 2 virtual machines, and 3 enterprise MongoDB databases, down to what we now have at Bird, which is basically 2 appliances, 1 in each of our own data centers. So it's a much more usable solution nowadays. So why bring your own keys? As Pete and Andy have mentioned, there are many requirements for controlling encryption keys nowadays. From a law firm perspective, many of our peers are required to manage and control encryption keys as part of our financial clients' requirements. They have requirements known as outside counsel guidelines that are specific to law firms that have requirements in terms of managing those encryption keys. And the reason for that is because, of course, these banks and very large enterprises trust us with their data. So the information security teams in these large banks and enterprises are releasing that data to the law firms. They want to make sure that that data is secure. Historically, it's been in an internal data center. As we all start utilizing cloud services, and that's not just law firms, obviously banks and many other places use cloud nowadays. They want to make sure that that data that's historically on site in the document management system, or DMS in terms of a law firm, it's moved out to cloud in a similarly protected manner. So what we're doing here is putting in building blocks for secure cloud services. In order to start using cloud services, we need to be sure that our data is protected wherever it is. Now, as Pete mentioned, data is encrypted in cloud already. It is encrypted with the cloud providers' encryption keys. But obviously there are limitations in terms of being able to control who has access to that data, because the cloud provider has access. And a subpoena to Microsoft or Amazon will release that data to the government body that has requested it. Now, for law firms, we can be dealing with very, very sensitive data, and obviously there may be requirements that have been put on to us by our clients that mean that we don't want to release that data to the government bodies unless it's, obviously a particular terrorist activity or something like that, where there's a real need for it. So what the bring your own key does is a key encryption key. So you create your own key, bring your own key. It then wraps the cloud provider's key. So the data is still encrypted with the cloud provider's key, but on top of that, it's encrypted with your own key, which is a key encryption key. So you can, as Pete mentioned, you can set up your own encryption keys in the cloud provider's platform. It's perfectly possible to do that. So both Microsoft and Amazon offer HSM-backed key management. And HSM, for those of you that maybe don't know, is a hardware security module. It's the physical encryption solution that sits either on site or, in this case, in cloud. Both Amazon and Azure offer software-based key services, but it's only the hardware security module backed versions, the HSM versions, that are much more secure, and they're the ones that work with bring your own key. So yes, you can set up your own keys, but as has been mentioned before, it's a manual process, and the backing up and key rotation is a manual process, and you then are expected to manage that yourselves. If you've got large teams, maybe you're happy to do that for Amazon, Azure, AWS, Salesforce, IBM, Google Cloud, whatever it is, that's fine. You can do that. However, if you've got a smaller team and you like operational fluidity, having it in one portal interface makes it an awful lot easier for operational staff. So IT staff like to be able to go to one portal where you've got all your key management systems in. So that's why we wanted a solution that could manage multi-cloud systems, because we recognize that there will be reasons for using different cloud services for different reasons. You may want to move from one vendor to another if the pricing for AWS or Azure goes through the roof, for example. So being able to manage keys on those different platforms is very important. In addition, of course, there is the fact that the cloud provider could access your data without your knowledge. And our protection for that is the fact that we have HSM to HSM key exchange. So it is actually direct from our own HSM on site into the cloud vendor's HSM. Having independent auditing is very important, making sure that those cloud vendors have separate auditing functions, and obviously you can put in your own MSSP to manage the logs that come out of the cloud vendor. Having those key alerts and log audits sent to your own SIM is very important, so you can understand what the activities on the keys have been. And in the case of Azure and Office 365, you can enable customer lockbox. We enabled that recently. What that means is that Microsoft engineers cannot access your data without pre-authorization from our own IT staff or global administrators in this case. Even if there's a major issue with a service on your tenant, they are unable to access that data before you've authorized it through a mechanism called customer lockbox. You can, as I've mentioned, use Azure HSM on demand or AWS Cloud HSM. These are dedicated HSM appliances held within the cloud. So therefore, you are not in a multi-user HSM, you're in a standalone single HSM that's dedicated to you. It's quite possible to use it. It's very expensive. It obviously is more suited to governments and banks that have that kind of cash to throw around. Multi-cloud platform, as I mentioned before, is very important. It's having one interface for all the cloud vendors. Setting up the different key management systems is a challenge. AWS is completely different to Azure, and so it is quite difficult to get your head around how the different key management systems work. So this makes it so much easier, and I'm happy to pass over this system to lesser qualified IT staff in order to run it. And obviously, from an operational point of view, it makes it much easier. So what can you encrypt with your own keys? Azure data at rest, storage encryption, SSE, BitLocker, Office 365 service encryption with customer key. This is what Microsoft call the product that encrypts all the data within OneDrive for business, SharePoint, Exchange Online, Teams chat, files, etc. We've only recently enabled that on the platform, and we've actually taken advantage of the customer key for tenant encryption. So our entire Azure and Office 365 tenant is now encrypted with our own keys. So you need to set up 3 separate subscriptions for that on Azure, and you put encryption keys into each one of these subscriptions, and then Microsoft encrypt all the data within the platform using those encryption keys that are specific for like SharePoint Online and Exchange and Teams, etc. You can also encrypt data in use with SQL Online as well. And AWS, there's a number of different encryption solutions at rest in applications and virtual machines, of course. Thales do offer other solutions such as file and folder encryption with the Talos CTE, which is encrypting the individual files and folders as they move in and out of cloud. That's not something that we've taken at this time, but I know some law firms have used that as well very successfully. And of course, one of the advantages that we've taken part in is utilizing the use of encryption keys within other platforms as well, or other services. So in our industry, in the legal industry, we refer to legal tech, which is same as fintech in finance companies, etc. Small startup companies with you know, one man and his dog and his Wizzy AI solution that sits on AWS almost certainly, because they love AWS startups, because you can buy everything with a credit card, and typically security is an afterthought, but the fact that we may be exchanging sensitive data with them means that we're concerned about the encryption of that data. And obviously AWS is encrypted, but it's better to encrypt it with our own key. So we've actively encrypted our data on so far 3 different legal tech platforms. And I'm in the process of encrypting our data in box.com as well, because that uses an AWS backend. So it means that all our data, and we haven't got a lot actually, we've got about 60 users that are using Box, but it's, you know, it's there for a reason. All our data will be encrypted with our own keys. So it shows that it's a great platform for utilizing encryption across a number of different solutions. I mentioned Relativity One there. It's a very popular e-discovery platform with law firms, and that's encrypted with our encryption keys as well. I mentioned earlier about moving between cloud providers. Of course, exiting cloud contracts means that you'll want to receive your data out of that platform, but you also want to make sure that any data that might be hanging around on redundant disks that are moved or taken out by the cloud provider are properly protected. So the data that's on those disks is encrypted with our keys, so we know that that data is secure. So we're happy to then move to another cloud platform. So the CipherTrust CCKM or CipherTrust Manager, as it is now, is the CipherTrust Manager has what's known as the CCKM, which is the Cloud CipherTrust Cloud Key Manager, and the Digital Security Manager, and the MongoDB all in one appliance, whether it be a software appliance or a hardware appliance. It's one appliance now, so it's much easier to run. Ours is hosted on our own data centers. It works with our own internal proxy server, so we don't expose it to the internet at all. It just connects directly up to our cloud services, and it's FIPS 140-2 certified. So how you connect to the Cloud Key Manager, it's basically an API connection. We've set up a couple of connections here. You can see AWS and Azure, so there are apps that are defined on Azure and AWS that enable that API connection into the services, and you just define the key vaults or KMS that they connect to. You can see there are a number of different solutions here. We're actually only using the key access management and Cloud Key Manager because they're the solutions that we need from this appliance. But you've got KMIP if you've got on-site SANs with self-encrypting disks, you can use the same platform for that. Data discovery, Pete mentioned that you can use it to discover sensitive data. And this is the CTE, which is the file and folder encryption as well. And there's the secure virtual machines, which I've not come across yet, but there are a number of other solutions available as well. And this you can see is how you'd set up schedules for backups and key rotation. So the nice thing about this is that you can set up individual key rotation schedules. If you need to rotate keys once a week, once a month, once a year, it's set up here. You can back up those keys offline as well if you like. Obviously, it's a bit of belt and braces, so you can actually back up those keys. As you can see, I've done so here to an offline backup. So just in case anything happens to the cloud portal, to the Cypher Trust Manager, you've got a backup as well in an offline safe as well. So obviously all your data is encrypted with your encryption key. So that's the last thing that you want to happen, is for that encryption key to go awry. So, and that's about it. It's a great product. It works well, and we've been using it very successfully now for, as I say, this is the second installation I've done, so it's working well. So I'm happy with it.
Good stuff. Martin, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, really appreciate you taking time out to share some of your experiences and insights. So no, superb. Thank you. Okay, right. So if we look to summarize, I mean, we've had a couple of questions that have come in, which we'll come to in just a moment, but we do have a few moments left. So if there are any other final questions, queries for Martin following his presentation, or for anyone that's spoken today, please, you've got a few minutes, so just pop them in the Q&A, and we'll come to those in just a moment. Okay, so look, really, as we've touched on throughout this morning's briefing, cloud key management really is the foundation for the secure adoption of cloud services. I think that's safe to say, and Andy, Martin, Pete have all reiterated just how important it is to get this right from the beginning to ensure ultimate security and control over your corporate data. And again, for various reasons across multi-cloud, because what may be one cloud today may be another in the future. So offering the utmost flexibility across all cloud services that you may want to utilize. And really, final point for me, obviously Martin shared his experience and how he approached the ticket at Bird & Bird, but yeah, some customers, they want to look at adopting cloud key management, CCKM, as maybe as a fully managed, privately hosted and highly resilient service. Maybe they don't have the team, the resource to help manage and support that. So there are multiple ways that we can help to support in delivering the CCKM service and solution, and clearly that we'd be open to a conversation to discuss the various delivery and support models that there are available to customers today. So hopefully a very useful morning. So let me just jump into a couple of the questions that we do have, and as I say, if there are any more, please do ping them in. So first question, I think I'll probably send this to yourself, Pete, if that's okay, and then if anyone else wants to come on top as well. But how does the CCKM interact with Azure enlightened services like search and e-discovery, etc.?
Yeah, so the way fundamentally that CCKM interacts with Azure is to provide the Azure Key Vault, the key. I'm not sure where the enlightened services sit, whether it's on the other side requesting a key from the Azure Vault. If that's the case, then because you're owning the key, as Martin alluded to, you're wrapping the key, you're pushing it into the Azure Key Vault. Anything in the software as a service entity from the Microsoft side that needs to take a key out of that vault to do any encryption, that's where CCKM would answer that. I don't know if Martin's got anything to add.
Yeah, my understanding is that it works in exactly the same way as it would do normally. So those activities are part of the Microsoft services, and they're automated services. So there are no engineers that have access to them. So they work in exactly the same way as they would before. Things like SQL Online, where if you're encrypting the data itself in use, I think that has an impact on it, because you're encrypting all the data within the platform itself. So I'm pretty certain that there will be challenges in terms of search activities if you're encrypting the data in use, but this is all at rest. So the data is encrypted at rest, and the Microsoft services are able to run because they're automated services. So that's the way I understand it.
Well, great stuff. Thank you both. And then final question for now, with working from home being now the norm, how do you manage backups of on-site HSMs as these require someone on site? Martin, have you got a view on that?
We still send our IT staff to do backups. Yeah.
I think it's a broader question in some ways about what's your data center strategy for this sort of thing. I mean, the answer is kind of layered, I think. It depends if you're running physical or virtual as to exactly how you might answer the question a little bit as well. But fundamentally, the recommendation would be you're running a resilient infrastructure. You have multiple Cipher Trust Cloud Key managers, so that in the event of you having an issue with one node, you've obviously still got service available and it's not quite so disastrous. In terms of backups of the data itself, I think Martin kind of alluded to the fact that that doesn't need to be someone physically plugged into the piece of tin to necessarily do that. So yeah, I think there's ways to get around that. It's probably a broader conversation in some ways.
I suspect that's probably more a question that's directed at some of the more complex products that Thales have, like the Lunar HSM. I mean, that's probably one for Pete to answer in terms of how you back that up.
Yeah.
Again, I guess that still requires on-site IT staff.
Exactly. So if it's the master key you're backing up, you certainly do need to have someone on site because it has to be very local. If it's HSM to HSM, I believe, again, Chris might be a better person to come on to this, but I believe that there is a command and control that you can do remotely to the HSMs and back one HSM up to another. Is that correct, Chris? I think that's the case on the HSM side. You want to mute, Chris?
Yes, we have a remote backup option for Lunar. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a Lunar HSM person. I'm kind of more the cloud side. Lunar HSM can act as a root of trust to CCKM, depending on what FIPS level you want to go to. And as Martin said, yeah, it can be a virtual machine, it could be itself in a cloud, or it could be a physical machine, or it could be a virtual or physical machine connected to a Lunar HSM for that root of trust. It's a bit of a, where do you need that FIPS level of compliance? But all options are available.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you all. Okay, so that's it in terms of questions for now. So I think we can look to wrap up with a minute to spare. So yeah, thank you again to all the presenters this morning. Thank you to everyone for joining. Hopefully you found it useful. We will be sharing out a copy of the slides that we run through today, so everyone's got access to those. And clearly, we'd love to hear from you and hear any feedback. And if there are any questions or queries that have come up following this morning, please do get in touch with myself or one of the account managers over here. Yeah, and we'd love to pick those up and discuss further. But for now, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your days and week, and we'll speak with you all soon.